G'day, welcome back. Today we're returning to the series on blunders in the World Chess Championship candidates matches in 1950 last time and in Budapest, and now in 1953 Zurich, which of course is a super famous tournament, perhaps the most famous tournament probably because of the two great books which have been written about it. I have the one by Bronstein and there's another one by Neidorf. A little bit wary looking at this tournament because there are many YouTube videos about the tournament itself and also some of the great games in the tournament. However, I'm looking at it with a slightly different perspective, going through the blunders. And I'll tell you what, there is a lot of blunders in inverted commas in this tournament. A lot of them I simply don't understand because there's some +3 swing in a very complicated middle game position. However, I've picked a few of the more well-known blunders. There's the missed mate in 2, and also I've picked a few of the more understandable end game errors which the players have made. So I could have done 20 games. I think I picked about 10 games to look at. So it might be a bit of a long video depending on how much time I spend going into the nitty-gritty, particularly the end games, which I find the most sort of understandable to process. And yeah, so let's crack on. The capture screen. So there's the Wiki Candidates Tournament, actually has a bit of a page on it. Now you can see the scores there. Smyslov won, and it's 15 player, all play all twice as white and black. And then some bit of a gap to Bronstein, Karras, and Reshevsky, who are all on +4. And I think the thing about this is, can't say much about it. This is one of those tournaments where the accusations of collusion between the Russian players to ensure that one of them won. I think the main threat was thought of Reshevsky, obviously a very strong player for quite a number of years. Take your own opinion on what's happening there. However, regardless of that, an absolutely amazing tournament with a list of players. I mean, you got Smyslov and Bronstein, Karras, Petrosian, Taimanov-Gligoric, and particularly with Petrosian, Taimanov, and Geller. I think Spassky and Korchnoi will turn up shortly. These are the players which for the next 20 years sort of dominating the scene. And then obviously Fischer and Larsen. And now I just find my chart. So there's the rolling scores. Now you see that Stahlberg has had better tournaments than this. So I'm just going to rerun that with a little feature where I'm sort of chopping the worst player. Okay, there's a chart which is a little bit easier to handle. So that's showing the rolling scores through the tournament. And Smyslov, the blue line, ends clearly in the lead in the end. I think he drew his last 5 games. Seems to be a tendency of people like Topalov and so on to sort of do that. But you can see that around the 20 round mark, it was pretty tight. You had Smyslov, you had the green, that's Reshevsky, you had Bronstein a little bit behind, and you also had Karras in there somewhere, probably caught up a little bit later. So mainly you'd say Bronstein, Smyslov, and Reshevsky sort of fighting at that stage. And you can see that I've highlighted there is a few games here where there are blunders which may not have gone the right way. Like Smyslov actually lost to Kotov with a blunder, so that actually brought him back. I don't think sure if that's one of the games we're going to cover, because you can see there's so many dots, so many blunders. So there, although in the end you'd have to say, like the last tournament in 1950, it was actually the blunders actually really did help Bronstein get to qualify for the playoff and then the world champions. Whereas in this, Smyslov, apart from the accusations of collusion, Smyslov was fairly clearly above in the end, and it wasn't really blunders which were making the difference. Although Reshevsky, you can see here, Reshevsky's made 2 blunders towards the end. I think Boleslavsky and Geller. So maybe the blunders were more a little bit of impact, but still, there's quite a big gap at the end. And you can also see I've got the rolling scores there. Shows you sort of the way it came out. And this other thing, just while we're looking at blunders by player, Szabo, Geller, Bronstein, Stahlberg, lots of blunders by the players, and gifts for player, which is the reverse on the receiving end. Well, actually, Taimanov didn't end up near the lead, neither did Euwe. Actually, you can see there's quite a few blunders in inverted commas, and didn't really sort of seem to be favouring one player versus another. That's what I wanted to sort of say, right? However, we'll go through these blunders and have a look, just as we go through the rounds, just think of the impact on the tournament. As I say, not that determining in the result. I'll refer to my 1953 book occasionally as we go through, because I've actually read that a long time ago and I've got some notes. And obviously what you're doing is you sort of, what was the rolling score of the key players as you go through the rounds. And you can see here with this chart, you've got green, so Reshevsky, Smyslov off to the early doors leading, and Yeah, occasionally Najdorf was doing okay, and then Bronstein came up, Kers came up, and so on. So, as said, let me look 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 11 games to go through, so let's back on. Okay, here's the capture screen. This is the critical position. This is Geller-Euwe from round 2. Actually, according to Bronstein, this won a brilliancy prize, and actually, it is one of the best known games of the tournament. You should actually load this game up and go through it yourself, or find a YouTube video about it, because it's definitely been covered many, many times. And you can see where the white queen is, and you got a black rook and pressure on g2. So obviously a fantastically complicated position. And if you look at the chart there, which I've loaded up about this game, then you can see that if Geller find the right move, position's dynamically balanced. I think we would say anything more than that. I mean, it's actually about 1,000-point swing, his next move. Not going to blame him for it, because let's have a look what Bronstein says. He's talking about turning mate in rook takes g2 check, queen c4 check, etc. Just you should have a look at yourself while I'm talking here. Requiring more than just 1 week's time showed that white could have saved himself. Right, so people actually feel like after bishop sacrifice, that people just then were looking and poring over it. What were the drawing resources and all that sort of stuff, right? So anyway, Bronstein shows some lines on this, and have a look at the position. Let's go through the game continuation first. Hopefully you've come up with some ideas for yourself. Rook c1, and it just fails. 2, takes g2, check. Can't go in the corner because the discovered checks are absolutely vicious. In fact, king h1, rook takes g3, check. And then you just have to decide if d5, bishop d5 check, rook e4, bishop e4, checkmate. Right, so that's instantaneous. So he played king to f1 and queen to b3, and there's all sorts of threats. Check on f3, check on d3, pick your poison, and king e1 is played. Queen to f3. Sort of that's where the game ended. We've got threats now on 2. Sure, there's a lot more other threats as well. So, okay, so let's go back to this position and have a look at what should have been done. Yeah, it's d5. Throw that pawn in the way, and this is the main point of it. Taken it, but now what you've got is the bishop is in now an exposed position, so that when this would be a logical continuation, when you get to this position, the bishop's on pre. So let's say the rook runs away. Okay, rook runs away. Bishop comes back, blocks the threats on the g file. Check, check. I mean, it's not wonderful, but see, white is able to get all his pieces around his king, and let's see how this is supposed to continue. Bishop c3, check, back with rook, check there now. I think we're heading virtual check some sort. Spin, that's nice. d6, even just move the king. I guess rook gets swapped off, and so I think that sort of gives you a sense of the complications in that position. As I say, of the games I'm looking at, this is probably the one where you should go and have a look at the whole thing on video, or just load it up yourself and play through it. There'd probably be annotated versions of it on some various websites, and I'm sure you get blogs on this game. It just looks like a fascinating position anyway, right? So needed a series of only moves by white to survive. Didn't manage it. So that is the first game. And now just let me load up the second one. Okay, so this is endgame blunder. Always like those. Rook endgame in particular. I mean, blunder's the wrong, too hard for it. Too strong a word, but it's what we're looking for here. Now, this is Euwe-Stahlberg. Both of them had pretty poor tournaments, so it doesn't have any impact on the outcomes. However, I think it's just a good lesson here to just sort of spend a bit of time and look at this. So what's the game score here? Pawns are even. White has the very dangerous pawn on a7, but you can see black has his pawn all the way over there on h3. So don't want to go down into a pawn endgame, I don't think. So there are two main, well, basically same. There's one concept here which draws for black, and what he played lost. So it might be good just to sort of have a look at the position, and we'll go through both lines. Okay, so what was played in the game was king c7, which is a very strange move, because you'd think that we should just go and grab that pawn. You'd think that's what should do, and the threat of taking the pawn would probably force white to check things. Anyways, that's not what he did. He did king c7. Now this loses a key tempo. Okay, king d5. That makes absolutely perfect sense. So now you look at it. Okay, well, what if king to b7 now? You haven't loaded up. So this wasn't the game continuation. Well, now you just munched that pawn. And I think the difference here is that, okay, we can You take the pawn, presumably that was his strategy. Rook h2. And this is actually winning for white because the black king is in such a shitty position. Say we go back and try and attack the pawn, or we just take that. Can take that pawn. Rook h6. We're going to grab this pawn, and the black king's too far away. We'll set up a Lucena position, right? So if you go back to here, that is what the problem is. So game continuation was actually king to d7, just passive defense. Okay, yeah, maybe it holds, maybe it doesn't, but let's see what the game continuation is. Attack the h pawn. So what we're going to do is going to pick off the h pawn. And in the game continuation, we can see that we've been able to hold the h pawn, and now we're just picking off these other pawns. And once again, this is just totally winning. The black king is cut off. Okay, so let's go through that a little bit more detailed to see what was going on. I think the point is here, rook a3. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go and pick up the h pawn. Okay, so there's not a lot we can do here. Let's just stay passive for the moment. We go there. The whole problem is now the king infiltrates that way. Go here. King infiltrates that way. So rook e8 was played. Now, promoting obviously doesn't work because of the pawn hiding over here. So let's go and pick up the h pawn. Now, we saw that line where black checked and it was just losing because he had to go back and pick up the a pawn anyway. Let's go straight for the a pawn. That might be more sense. Then we're going to grab the h pawn, grab the a pawn. All right, okay, so now this is the problem. There's a skewer there all the time. So the tactic there, which is holding white's win there, is that the very poor position of the black king means that basically can't pick up the a pawn. So then, as a result, we had this line. There's a game continuation. Got to go swing behind the pawn. Still can't take it. We can take it now, but we hold it. And then obviously this turns into a fairly easy win for white. I mean, that was a game continuation. I mean, what are we going to do here? Black has to hold that pawn with his rook. If his king goes across, then he'll end up with a winning king and pawn endgame, I'm sure. You can see that basically what happens here. F pawn drops, and then the white's F pawn can then be shepherded through. So that was quite unfortunate by Stahlberg. That was if you look at the blundering thing here, it's mainly that blunder point there, right, where he should have played. Go back to that position. They're both the same, king b7. So we're threatening to pick up the pawn. Okay, so let's have a look at what would a normal continuation be. Okay, so that pawn's dropping. We've got to run for the h pawn. Take it. And you can see the difference here, that even if black loses his f pawn, in this case, the black king gets in front and actually got a pawn back. Right, so that you look at that in more detail. But the thing is that's one way of it happening, and the other way is go back to this position is king there, and you can see the king d5. Well, that makes sense. Let's grab that pawn instead, right? But now we just take this pawn because we're gonna have to go over there, and our king c7, and we've held our pawn. I mean, take maybe this pawn drops, but you still have the situation that black's king is more active. Let's do a typical continuation. Check, king to e6, check, take the pawn, take the pawn, right? It's going to be a draw, right? So if you look at that initial position, which we started from, this position, king c7 was just sort of this nothing move, right? Whereas if you just do the calculation in this endgame, then you should have run back and picked up the pawn. Now, one thing I can say is obviously a lot of the errors in this tournament were attributed to time pressure. So if we're looking at this one, Euwe-Stahlberg, let's see what Bronstein says. I did skip through quite a lot of games. As you can see, this is round 14 already. Trying to find the right page. Let's have a look at a few things we've got here. The crux of this remarkable endgame, and in fact of the entire game, Stahlberg quite evidently thought that he could support his pass h-pawn in some lines. And then we go to the key position, 51, king c6 to c7. If black had advanced his pass pawn to the second rank, white would not have taken it off at once, but given check on c2 first with the black king confronted b file, white would have had an easy win. So he's actually missing the fact that on he mentions king b7 on move 50, the move before, but he doesn't mention on move 51, where, as we can see, it's a draw. So this is obviously, I mean, I'm using an engine, right? So that tells me exactly how these things solve. So they were looking at these ideas. They didn't quite have it all sorted out correctly. Anyway, so that was a great end game to have a look at. So let's move on to the next game. Okay, so now we've moved on to round 15, Smyslov-Petrosian. So here is one of those games where actually Smyslov blunder affected his chances. In fact, I mean, he's got a winning game here, and he blundered. I use the term advisedly. It's that easy to calculate, so that he drew with Petrosian rather than beating him. Right, so there's a half point which Smyslov gave away in the scheme of things. I mean, if we look at where we are, round 15, we're somewhere around here. There it is. There, I've actually got that one highlighted. Smyslov-Petrosian. He could have even got further ahead of the pace of the chasing pack at that stage, but he missed his chance. Have a look at this. There's one main winning line, a couple of moves win, but what he played was fairly placid. So, okay, let's have a look. So basically, the obvious continuation, we'll just show it. Check, move your king somewhere, and the pawn comes off. And this position, it's supposed to be a draw. Pretty tricky, but still, that's what the threat is. Like just played queen e5, sort of enable that threat. So let's have a look at what was played in the game. We'll get another move later. So he took the knight, takes. Now we've got a queen. So whatever. We've got an extra piece. Black has an extra pawn, but I think there's a lot of checks coming, drawn position, and they agreed to a draw. Could even play d2 and basically pick up the bishop. So that's sort of like the suggested game continuation, something along that. Okay, cool. Right. So what are we missing here? Right. So you don't need to give up the queen for the knight and then promote to a queen, and you don't need to take the queen and allow that fork. So the move to play is actually one of them anyway. Queen d6. Right. So now we're still threatening to promote our pawn to a queen. So can black do? Just go through a typical continuation. Got two queens now. Check. But the difference, you end up a piece up. So okay, there's the continuation. Right, you end up piece up, and you're obviously going to win that end game. So that's why this queen d6 move is actually the play back here. Smyslov missed that, so that was unfortunate for him. Okay, so that was a fairly straightforward one. That one, but just look at this continuate all these dots here. So it was a very tricky game. Petrosian made quite a few blunders. Smyslov made quite a few blunders, and then in the end, Smyslov was winning. Okay, so let's move on to the next game, which I have. Okay, so this is Taimanov-Gligoric, round 17. Round 17, it'll be somewhere in here. I mean, neither of those players were competing for the top. So let's have a look at what the blunder is. I mean, you have a look at the position. Pawns are even, pieces are even. Should be drawn. Very strong knight on e5. Let's have a look what happens here. It's one of these things where one move draws and another move doesn't. So would you play king f2 or king e2? Right, what was played was king e2. So let's see what happens with king e2. You can see tactic, snap off the bishop, take the pawn with check. Okay, so white's idea is obviously to run across, game continuation, and pick up the d pawn, take the b pawn. So if you have a look, the problem that white has is he can't take the pawn at the moment because there's a skewer and he loses rook. So therefore, I mean, this is all probably part of his planning. c1, so king b5 wasn't the best move, but hold the pawn, don't lose the pawn. King takes d4. Kind of interesting. Okay, fine. So black's a pawn up, but he's got three isolated pawns, but this is actually winning. And what's the approach here? Full game continuation. Check. e3. The only sensible move, I would believe. And then now, still only one mini move. It's pretty tight, this whole situation. We just push our pawn. And I think we've probably got the Chiron style position. Frontal attack on a pawn, and the pawn is far enough advanced. There are other pawns on the board which confuse the issue, but so check. Obviously, if you do the continuation here, the checking continuation, just add that in. It's not going to work. Therefore, there's other pawns on the board. So we swing behind the position. Okay, we'll push our pawn, make it even more difficult for white to pick up those loose pawns. Could have also gone behind the c pawn, push the c pawn, counterattack, check, hold the f pawn, and the c pawn's going to lose white his rook. and then black will win. Right, so go all the way back to position here. So that was king e2. King e2 lost. King f2, right? And if you don't take the knight, then we've just got this position which looks very drawn, right? So why doesn't it work in this position? Exactly the same continuation. Pawn drops straight away, and we're holding our d-pawn. Okay, let's try something different. Actually, the engine line is, in fact, take the d-pawn. So what's the difference? The pushed d-pawn means that you lose your own d-pawn, but with check, we can attack the rook, and we can either hold the pawn, or I think we can swing across, play king e3. There's a few moves. You can see the king e2 lost because that extra tempo, the check, gave black all he needed to do to basically hold his formation together while grabbing that pawn and picking up that pawn. So that was quite an interesting sort of end game to consider. Okay, as I say, Gligoric and Taimanov not really in the running for this tournament, so doesn't really have much of that theme. But once again, I really think looking at some of these end games and looking at where some of these great players went wrong gives you some insights into how to play these games. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so everybody knows this game. Unfortunately, you look at it, it actually doesn't show up in my filter properly, and the reason for that is that the way I do the eval, I've got it's on me. I've got to work out how to deal with an issue, which we'll talk about in a second. Right. So here's the position. White is in a strong position here. Bishop f6, for instance, or anyway, different moves. Knight f6 check, in fact, is a very strong move. Basically, it's +3. Have a look at the next move is the blunder, and have a look what's wrong with the blunder. Oh, sorry, I put that there. I mean, you've seen this game before. Actually, I covered this in my sort of intro video. So basically, black cannot do that. It should be made into so check. Pawn is pinned. Could move in the corner, and we just take that bishop with check. Checkmate. Okay, so that is the problem. Don't know what to say about that. Both sides missed it. Makes it real stunner, right? But when the game just continued, bishop takes f6. Still has a good advantage. Even get changed off. And then gradually white lost his advantage and the game ended a draw. So that was a bit of a mess up by Reshevsky. Could easily have lost that game, and he was lucky not to lose. So that's something in his favour. Now, as I say, that the problem is that when I look at the PGN, this is the evaluation is mate, which is not a number; it's a #2 in the PGNs, and I'm not picking it up properly. I have to fix that because it should actually be really what move is move 21. There should be a huge spike, move 21. Cool. Okay, I've seen that one before. I'm sure you've seen it in other videos. So one of the clearest examples of a terrible blunder. And let's have a look at what Bronstein said about it. Around 19. So the thing is that with this book, it does not have chapters. So you've got to sort of find the page which says the round, and it's from with all books. Here we go, Szabo-Reshevsky, bishop b2 to f6. This has not happened in tournament play in a long time. Both grandmasters have overlooked a mate in 2 by queen g6 check, bishop g7, queen g7 mate. Black's only move was king h8 when white would have continued his attack. Cool. Let's move on to the next game. Okay, so we're now on to round 21, towards the end of the tournament. Kotov-Smyslov, that's this blunder here by Smyslov, which actually is the one which allowed Reshevsky to catch up to him briefly. Now, you can see Smyslov's not really having it all his own way on these blunders. This position, you look at it, we're early in the game, position's fairly balanced. Smyslov makes a blunder on this move, and it's basically game over after that. See from the continuation. So have a look. This is just a tactical exercise. So actually, let's just say what black played was bishop takes c3. So what is wrong with that move? And you can see it's basically like desperado pieces, right? The sort of the continuation, game continuation, we take rook. So we're now attacking your queen, but we can then move. Oh, okay, so there's a couple of continuations here. You could go bishop takes b4 or bishop takes b2, but the problem is that the desperado is both ways, also threatening to take the rook on d8 with check. So that isn't effective because we'll swap rooks and we'll get the bishop move. So game continuation. Now we just pick up the bishop, and if you look at that, we now have two minor pieces for a rook, and there's basically no compensation. The computer's actually saying +4. Yeah, and see bishop pair. Just a good position. The knight's going to have all these beautiful dark squares to sit on, and black no longer has his dark red bishop, which was there, sitting pretty. Okay, so that was bishop takes c3. Now let's have a look at the alternative, which is just rook takes c3. Let's just exchange off that way. Okay, so now you get the same continuation because the whole thing is the rook is hanging. Yeah, so that's why it was being played. So desperado rook takes the queen off, takes the queen off, bishop takes the bishop, rook moves. And this is just a good position for black. Yeah, so in fact the point is that if you go here, rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, probably better from white's hand. Now we take the rook off, rook d1. It's kind of balanced in a way. Yeah, so I obviously I don't know what Smyslov missed here when he played bishop takes c3. Obviously he didn't wasn't able to sort of calculate all the way. Takes d7, which was regular because it attacked the queen, attacked the rook with check, and also there's a loose bishop there. Okay, so that was one of Smyslov's slip-ups in this tournament. So at that point, we are now round 21, and interesting to sort of highlight the fact that you have Smyslov and Reshevsky equal, and then a game behind, you've now got Bronstein, and another game behind, you have Cares. So sort of getting pretty close at this point. So let's move on to the next one we're going to look at. Okay, we'll just do it here. You can see this game is a bit of a shocker. You can see that Reshevsky makes a terrible blunder from a winning position and Boleslavsky returns the favour. So much for the Russians helping out Smyslov. Anyway, there's this point here on the chart. You can see it, right? So this is where Smyslov won that round and Reshevsky won that round because of this double blunder. And they're still even on points after round number 22. So let's have a look at the position. I mean, black's got a dangerous pawn, but he is the exchange down. Pawn is well covered. King is safe. And the black king is very exposed to some back checkmate threats, which black's going to have to deal with. He played bishop f8. Rook a8 was another move, but rook a8, you just lose the big pawn. It was game over. So have a think about, just to get your sense into this position. So bishop f8, so we're sort of protecting ourselves from immediate annihilation of the back rank. And now winning move is, well, there's several winning moves. There's the very banal one. We can certainly try rook d8. We'll just add that in. Black's got nothing. If he doesn't move the rook so that he can guard the bishop's going to be ganged up on. He'll lose that bishop, right? So, for instance, computers even suggesting just pop the you obviously lose. Yeah, but what we can do is we go back and move, and we can also go this way. It's quite clever, right? So, let's say we try and hold the pawn. What happens then? Well, we get check, up, go check again. You know, you're gonna if go there to keep the bishop, and then just take the pawn. So all these things going on, right? Now, what did Reshevsky do, which was wrong? He played rook d to d7. He obviously he's thinking, he's visualizing all sorts of brilliant checkmates. It's very, very interesting. This is a tactical puzzle. One move draws, everything else loses. Okay, so the funny thing here is that what black played was bishop c5, and now we're back on track. Check. Bishop's got to go back. And that's the end of the game. Obviously, the pawn's dropping. But if we go back to this position here, an amazing resource, rook to a7. So we can't take that b pawn because we'll lose a rook. And the best the computer gives is, one line is rook f7. Well, we can get the bishop out of dodge. There. Fate. We take the pawn. Queen. Take it. Take it. This is given as a draw. Certainly the wrong color bishop for starters. Not that we have h pawn yet, but you know, that's you can imagine that position is drawn. So this skewer tactic, just fantastic. I like that. Anyway, so that's Reshevsky nearly losing a half a point. So basically, he's keeping pace, round 22, keeping pace with Smyslov at this point in time. So let's move on to the next game. Well, just before we do that, I forgot to mention what Bronstein said about the previous game. And here, black might have saved his game with the clever rook retreat from a2 to a7. Boleslavsky still had a few minutes, and in the light of day, he would no doubt have seen and played that move. But at 2 a.m., and after a tense and exhausting struggle, he played automatically bishop f8 c5. And after, so that's what said about that one. So now we're moving on to the same round, actually, Taimanov-Szabo, which neither of these guys are really in the running. Let's go down to the key position. You can see it's very weird what goes on here. Game ends up a draw. You can see Szabo is winning, and he just gives it all away in one move. So let's bring up the position. There's the position on the board, and maybe it's a bit unfair. There's one winning move here. Let's have a look at what White just played, just so we understand what's going on. White's threatening to promote his e-pawn, and game continuation was promote, check, gets grabbed, check, check. And they agreed to a draw because you're going to take the rook off, for instance. King takes, and then I think we are getting a virtual check of some sort here. Okay, so go back to the key position. It's a bit beyond me, this one, but there's like a very good winning motive. Look at it, it's knight f4. So you're threatening a lot of things here. Let's just do a typical continuation. One is to bring the queen back and defend. Now we take the queen. Now we've got a check, check, check. This is obviously a winning endgame. And what about just pushing the pawn? That was what was the threat? Check, take, check. Got to go in the corner. You can see the key there now is the knight is holding the rook, and we take the rook off, and there's horrible discovered check threatened everywhere. And amazingly, there's not a lot White can do here. So let's say we checked. Well, then obviously we just do a check, and you're going to be checkmated. So it's quite amazing. Two queens, still totally losing. Maybe that's what would scare me off. I want person with opponent with two queens. You'd think there'd be some resource, but if you look at that final position we had there, it's all to do with because the rook is covering the g-pawn. Almost any attacking tiers. So that was unfortunate by Szabo. He should have won that game. Just pitted out to a draw. Actually, that was round 22 as well. Let me see what Taimanov-Szabo, what Bronstein says. At the last moment, Szabo's nerves failed him. He may have been short of time, and he too failed to see the pretty and thematic knight f4. When even two queens would not be enough to save White from mate and basically the line. So that's quite cool. Yeah, excellent. Okay, now moving on to one of the critical blunders. This is round 24, Reshevsky-Geller, and you can see on this chart at the bottom that Reshevsky winning game blundered. And this is this point here where he slipped a bit behind Smyslov, but if he won that, he'd still only be 1 point behind Smyslov. There was another one here, Reshevsky blundered against Boleslavsky. That wasn't so clear, so I've left that one out. But you can get a sense here that he's kind of losing the plot a little bit himself, regardless of what else is going on in the rest of the tournament. Now, here's the position, and his next move allowed a draw. So let's just play it. Rook to f6. Makes sense. Yeah, no problems there. Throws away the win, and there's a trick here. What is the trick? Which Geller? d3 check. Okay, it's fine. f2. Rook a3. Give the game continuation for a bit. Check. These desperado checks. Take it. It's a draw. See, the problem is that the White king takes. That's where it's covered, and it will be a draw by stalemate. Because of that, the position ended up drawn position. Look at, right? So if we get back to here, d3 check, king f2 moves back. I mean, what else we can do? We can take this with check. King takes h4, and can't advance the b pawn because it will be captured on either b3 or b4. Get the rook out of the way. King cross. Going to protect that pawn somehow. If you come back to protect it, the black king nestles itself inside the connected pawns. That pawn was there. Keep going. Let's say we've got to play g3 to make any progress, but the king is nestled nicely, and there's no way that the white king can do anything. Let's take it. Right? Yeah, so that was a... Geller had to see it. Geller had to see that stalemate trick. And in fact, what was said in this game was that there was actually very few moves earlier. Even that check was unnecessary, right? Maybe do something else and just gradually move forwards without that stalemate threat. +5 caught in the engine, right? So you should be able to organize yourself to win this game. Keep the king cut off. Just say black waits. Push that pawn. If black goes for it, can't take it because there's a viewer there. Take it. And what we're going to do is go target this square here. And then we'll take the pawn and we'll be winning. Right, so that was a bit of a pity for Reshevsky. So he's actually fallen away. I mean, the tournament's kind of already over now. So let's have a look at the last couple of blunders we're going to have a look at. One is game 282. Okay, we're now in round 26. It's Gligoric-Geller. Obviously, neither of these guys are in contention. You can see Gligoric basically a big blunder just before move 60. Look at what that is. It's going to be another good endgame one. Position's drawn. Anything, bishop d2, bishop a5, whatever. So this is one of those, we've seen a lot of them, transition errors. So Gligoric had spent too much time pondering and waiting what black has by his consistent play, strengthened his pieces, blah, blah, blah. The final error, he should not have traded his bishop. White now rids himself of the pawn at e2, but the d-pawn becomes still more dangerous. The bishop should move back and forth along the diagonal. Yeah, so Bronstein's always very fair with his comments. Took the knight. White probably thought after grabbing the e-pawn, he'd be doing okay, but look at this d-pawn run. Run, Forest, run. Okay, so the game continuation. Rook f2, check. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of difference. We'll just move our king up. It's a shame that actually king going the other way doesn't win. So the point is we've got to support this pawn, right? That pawn doesn't matter, right? Common theme in these sorts of positions. We block that, king comes running through, push our pawn, good, okay. That wins. He could have taken the pawn, but that's fine. So this pawn's going to lose white his rook. Check, king away, push the pawn, got to take it. Okay, right, so still winning, right, because g5. What's going on here? Walk back. Might as well play c5, doesn't really help. Got 2 pawns, but you've got 3 pawns. But none of them make any difference because you look at it 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And what's white going to do? Let's have a look. White can go 1, 2, 3, for instance. Let's say he does that. Okay, and then now you've got 4, 5, 6. Obviously, he's not going to make it. So black wins. So that should not have taken the knight off. Back at this move here, should not have played bishop takes because this is a lost endgame because of the advance. The first d-pawn is going to lose the white rook, and the second d-pawn is going to win. So that was quite interesting. Quite a few good rook endgames in this. There are also good rook endgames without blunders in them, which maybe a different lens of looking through these tournaments will be looking at all the good endgames in the candidates World Chess Championship matches. But I'll leave that to somebody else. So anyway, just one last game to have a look at. Which let's bring that up. Okay, so the tournament's already over at this stage, but we've got Bronstein-Reshevsky round 28, and Reshevsky actually blunders in this position. What is this over here? Just this game here, which actually allows, you can see, allows Bronstein to catch back up to Reshevsky, and Keres is in there somewhere coming in this way, so they all sort of end up on the same sort of score. You can spend some time looking at it and working out what is wrong with rook to a3. Looks like a nice skewer, but that loses the game. And what does Bronstein say about this? Black is absolutely determined to attack 2 bishops simultaneously with this move. While I was still writing it down, because it's Bronstein is white. In fact, Reshevsky offered a draw for the 3rd time this game. It's toward the end of the tournament. People just want to get to the end of it. And the problem is, there's a trick. When in fact, read around the text, Bronstein said he was setting the trap for Reshevsky. What is the problem? The problem is the following move, which attacks the rook, and it also threatens a very neat mate in 2, check out f8, and then back to h6, probably be checkmate. So black played on, or the exchange down, and there's a very nasty pass pawn, which is much more dangerous. It looks like he's trying to stop the rook from stopping the e-pawn, but the bishop can do it anyway. And now it sort of peters out. Check. Bishop's gone. It's obviously a win white. Yeah. Resigned there. Okay, cool. So that was Reshevsky. So he did himself no favors. If you have a look at this, from being equal in the tournament after 22 rounds, he didn't show that one. He blundered a bit against Boleslavsky, blundered against Geller, and then blundered against Bronstein. So actually, he just Bronstein blunder there, and he won the next game. That's why they all same score. Okay, cool. So look, quite a few games in that video. Sorry about that, but there was many players, and there were many rounds, and there were many games which had errors, more than like that, about 300, which I was searching for. Of course, we all kind of know this tournament. We know who won it, and we know who the main participants were, and all that sort of stuff, right? So just get that out of the way. And then I think when we go in the next one, 1956, we're getting to tournaments which actually I'm much less familiar with, and maybe this tension of through the tournament and the impact of blunders, we'll see something a little bit more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.